What happens when you hit your 60s and all of a sudden you realize you've gained over 40 pounds, you're technically obese, you don't feel well, you don't look well, and you basically hit the end of your rope in terms of what you can tolerate about yourself? Package that with being diagnosed with some different chronic illnesses, pre-diabetic, and what are you going to do? Well, today I'm thrilled to be joined by a good friend and business colleague of mine, Helen Gerhard. She's going to share a little bit of her story from her journey being raised on a farm, growing up largely with, the beef raised in the cattle yard there on their farm, but not having a lot of other things, and how that limiting mindset of almost lack, not necessarily the lack of going hungry, but lack, and how that led into different patterns of eating in her life. We'll talk about a health scare that her husband had. Helen eats largely plant-based, and she'll talk a little bit about her journey with that, with movement, exercise, and then cutting back, and then ultimately giving up alcohol. So stay tuned. I'd love to introduce you to Helen and see what your thoughts are. And don't forget to grab my guide over at lowertoxiclife.com. So again, welcome my guest today, Helen Gerhard. Helen, longtime friend, longtime colleague. It's so great to have you here on the show.
Thank you, Jackie. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to share some time with you.
Well, I'm excited to hear more about you and your health journey. Although we've known each other a long time, we've never really chatted a whole lot about that. So it's going to be great. So tell us, first of all, a little bit about you, a little about you personally, what you do for work, just your overall life experience. Give us an insight into Helen.
Sure. So I am the youngest of five girls. I grew up on a farm in South Dakota, and I married my husband, Dave, at the age of 18. I've known him since I was 3, and we have shared 48 wonderful years together. We've moved 11 times. We've lived in 9 cities and 4 states. And so we've always been on the move. And I am a proud mom of 2 amazing grown sons, and we cherish any time that we get to spend with them. 25 of our 48 years, we were spent raising kids, all while living 600 miles away from family. So Dave and I just kind of decided we're going to lock arms as a team and manage the daily life, stresses, joys, and responsibilities without the aid of family to kind of fill in the gap. And we forged a partnership that I would not trade for the world. And we currently reside in Green Bay for the 3rd time. And I'm a passionate quilter and fabric dyer. Dave actually started quilting 2.5 years ago after retiring. So we work together and make some quilts, and then we do donate about 4 to 5 quilts a year to Project Linus. That is an organization that gives quilts and blankets to children in need. And I enjoy staying active with walking. I have a rebounder, and I ride my stationary bike. And I've been dabbling in some resistance training a little bit with some free weights, and I need to get more serious about that. And I currently work full-time as a customer service representative. And in the past, I've been a supervisor, a trainer, and also a project analyst.
Very good. I love my rebounder, and I love weight and resistance training. And so I will put in the show notes, I will add some of those videos that I've already done for anybody that's interested. And I don't know about you, but for me, I've worked out my whole life. I started that way. A lot of times it was men I was dating, and then ultimately marrying my husband, who was very fitness oriented. And that just really got me on the path of always being super interested in and understanding fitness. And now in this later phase of my life, I've let go of all the big, heavy, crazy weights and different things like that. I had injured an elbow joint in 2008. That's how long it's been. And I ended up with a physical therapist. And I remember she was asking me about my fitness routine, and I was telling her my weights and the weight and everything. And she looked at me and she goes, "Are you a competitor?" And I was like, "No." "Are you going to be?" "No." And she was like, "Why are you lifting that heavy a weight then?" And I mean, it was just like, that V8 moment. And ever since then, I just really focused on functional movement, the things that as we age, like being able to put your seatbelt on, all those things that you hear about, like if you fall and break a hip, or break a shoulder, how it can really almost spell the end or really a rapid decline in your life. So I feel like those things are so important and they're so easy now with bands and different things that you can
Mhm.
do just around the house. I haven't belonged to a gym in years, but I still get a little bit of a workout in every day. Some days it's 10 minutes, some days it's a full hour, but it's so important.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your health journey. Where you kind of started, different peaks and valleys in your life, and kind of where you are now.
Sure. So I haven't really been health conscious mind very long, actually. It's kind of as I look back, to me, I find it somewhat appalling. I learned some not so good habits growing up on that farm in South Dakota. My dad actually would be what you'd consider a organic farmer. But we ate primarily beef at every meal. I mean, he had cattle in the feedlot, and we ate beef every meal, along with potatoes, bread, baked goods. Ice cream was in the freezer all the time. Dad loved ice cream, but our diets were very low in fruits and vegetables. About the only vegetable we had, the cupboards were always bare, but we always had beef, but we would eat green beans slathered with Velveeta cheese. So that was about the only vegetables we had. And, sometimes I'd come home from school after a 45-minute bus ride home and then have to go back into town. And when I grew up, Mom maybe wouldn't have food or supper on the table because Dad was out doing chores for the farm. And I'd just throw a T-bone in the broiler, and that was my supper. I didn't have anything else. That was my supper. And I'd eat the whole big T-bone. And so then in the 70s, taco kits came along. And so we had tacos a lot, but, just my diet was less than admirable, let's put it that way. And because of that lack of food kind of in the cupboards and having decent food to eat, when we got married, that trend continued. But I then became a volume eater somewhere along the line. And I've always cooked in bulk. I always have leftovers in the fridge and the freezer. And so I kind of, and I eat, I used to eat seconds and thirds. And, at some point I ballooned up in weight and started having some health issues. And I kind of attribute it back to my childhood. I don't want to say it was a scarcity mindset, but there was just nothing in the house to eat other than maybe baked goods and beef and potatoes, maybe some carrots with a roast. But it was just, as I look back, it was not an ideal situation for eating a healthy diet. Let's put it that way.
Helen, I think you bring up a good point, and in a sense, it is a bit of scarcity, not in the sense of like lack or starving or going without, going to bed hungry or those kind of
Right.
things. But I think that mentally we can build this picture of not enough or wanting more or something. And then as we grow into adulthood and we begin to take on all that for ourselves, there can be a tendency to overdo, overeat, overconsume, over all that stuff. And of course, as we all know, as the food culture has grown and the crap that goes into it, quite frankly, all that catches up with you. And while you may be eating the same quantity of food, even the quality changes so dramatically in the effect that it has in your body and, holding on to it in your weight and dealing with chronic health issues and all that really changes. So I'm glad you mentioned that because I think sometimes we have a tendency to think of scarcity and hoarding or a lot of that as only that happens with somebody who's gone without. But it's not always the case. It's just how and especially as a child, how we perceive different things and how we, build a mental relationship with that.
Yeah, it is very interesting.
Yeah. So then what happened? You mentioned that you this is a fairly recent thing. So what happened that created a shift for you?
Well, I started to research some ways of losing weight, over the years. And I've, kind of yo-yoed and went up and down in my weight. But In 2018, I was thoroughly disgusted with how I looked and felt, not necessarily even from a vanity standpoint, but I'd look in the mirror and I was puffy and I was achy and I was just tired all the time. And I didn't have the energy to do anything. And my labs were terrible and I was obese. I was at 175 pounds. I am 5'1". And by that time, I was on 4 high blood pressure medicines and statins actually for quite a while. And what was interesting is every year I'd go into the doctor for my physical. I mean, I've been religious about doing that. And over the years, with my weight increasing, at no point did they ever mention, "Gee, Helen, I see that you're, gaining weight, and you maybe should look at the fact that you are really considered obese. Maybe look at doing some things to work on that." They never brought up fruits or vegetables. They never asked what I was eating or if I was doing any kind of exercise. And clearly I was obese, but they didn't mention that. But if I mentioned if I was stressed, numerous times, like when you're in customer service, you have stressful days, you have stressful moments, you're in a call center setting, and you have all these, things that you need, targets you need to meet. And, one day I had the conversation, life's a little bit stressful, and my company had been bought out. Boy, but did they want to go ahead and prescribe medicine for anxiety though, but never mention anything about let's change some things that might help you manage stress better or anything like that. It was, let's do you some more medication. I'm like, absolutely not. I'm not going to do that. So I knew then at that point, it really was my responsibility to kind of rectify this situation. And so around 2018, I started working on a plan. I had lost some weight. And then we get to 2020 and, we're in a lockdown.
Which shall remain nameless. Yes.
Yes. Yes. And so we're in this lockdown. And after 5 months of sitting around, any weight I had lost, I gained back. And, I just knew that nobody was going to come and save me. And so in talking with my son who lives in New York City, he had a Apple Watch, and he said, because he does a lot of walking in New York City because he takes public transit, and he'll get off 2 miles early just to walk so he can get his steps in. And so we were talking about this. He said, "Mom, why don't you consider getting that?" And he said, we can challenge each other, or at least encourage each other, because I'm not going to be walking 20,000 steps in a day. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. But I started to walk daily in August of 2020. And by the end of the month, I was up to about 10,000 steps, and I was sleeping better. I started to, a better eating plan, and, just getting out and getting fresh air, really was quite helpful. So that was a big help. So
I love that because the whole going for a walk and being out in nature, that's like a double whammy, but in a good way. Like you're getting your movement in, but you're also de-stressing, what you had talked about with the stress levels and all of that. Just movement alone helps release that, but
yes.
being out in nature just really adds to that. So that's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it is. And where we live on the street, I mean, we're in Wisconsin, so we have a lot of trees, and summer and fall, and even in the winter, if I go out and walk, if it's not too cold, I mean, with no leaves on the trees and the sun is just right. I mean, it's beautiful. And so we've got this cascade when the leaves are on the trees, it's just beautiful view. And so it's really a nice walk, and I can stay in my neighborhood. And, if I get out several times during the day, I can get in 10,000 steps, just, kind of walking, 30, 45 minutes to maybe an hour or a little bit more, depending on how fast I walk. So it is nice.
Yeah, it's amazing when you set your mind to it. It's amazing how simple it is really and truly to consistently hit 10,000 steps average in a day. I always say average. There's going to be those days when I don't make it, and there's going to be those days when I'm 12,000, 15,000, whatever. And so my goal is to always have an average over the course of a week, over a course of the month and the year of 10,000 a day. What did you
Absolutely.
do So that's a little bit of the movement and that. Tell us a little bit about eating and food and choices along nutrition.
Well, I decided that I needed to make some changes. There's quite a family history in my family with my sisters. And so I decided I needed to change eating habits and exercising because I have one sister that had a stroke, has AFib. Another one has had a stroke and breast cancer. Another one died of esophageal cancer 4 years ago. She was a heavy drinker. My mom had high blood pressure, a heart murmur, a stroke, and she died in a nursing home. My dad has had numerous, surgeries for cardiac things and ended up with colon cancer. I mean, and my grandmother had uh, also a stroke, and she lived with us until she passed away when I was a little kid. So I knew that I needed to make these changes. And so back in about May of 2022, I contacted a nutritionist on my own. Again, the doctor did not recommend this. So, it was like, hey, nobody's coming to save me. And by this time, I had lost probably about 19 pounds. And so I was working with this nutritionist kind of in a group setting. She had a 5-week program, but the first week she said, I want you to eliminate all meat. Well, I had started to gradually eliminate meat in my diet anyway, because I had had some food poisoning, some allergies to salmon. And so I had really cut back on that. So I did that, and I saw that I was losing a little bit of weight, nothing major, but a lot of my aches and pains were subsiding, and I had more energy. I felt lighter. I just felt better. And so for that week, I eliminated the meat, and then, kind of continued on. I didn't necessarily follow everything that she was recommending because I was becoming a little more plant-based. And so then I eliminated cheese, and cheese is really difficult to eliminate. I don't know if you are a cheese eater, but living in Wisconsin, we have some of the best cheese, but it's very heavy in salt. And it's actually very addictive. And that was the biggest thing that I found was the most difficult to give up, that and chips, as far as like tortilla chips. I'm not a big potato chip eater, but those were the two things that I found very difficult. So I worked with that program, and then about 15 months, well, in August of 2023, after kind of evaluating this family history and realizing that, I needed to get my labs under control, I decided I'm going to go plant-based primarily, about 90%. So I did that and really kind of tweaked some things. And then by that time, I was already down to 144 pounds. And then I had a goal weight of what I wanted to do by the time I turned 65 was I wanted to get down to what I weighed when I was 30, which was 130 pounds. Now, that's 27 pounds heavier than what I weighed when we got married. But I'm like, I want to do this because the visceral fat was getting pretty bad. And so I just decided this is a goal of mine. And so the thing is, I found with the way I was eating, I was never hungry. I felt great. I felt really light. And so I'm about 90-10. So then in terms of 90% plant-based and 10% animal-based. And so that was working very well for me. However, Dave ended up in the hospital in this last May of 2024 for 9 days. He was in 2 hospitalizations, ended up with 2 intestinal blockages at 2 different times. And so when you're in the hospital that long, it was right here in Green Bay, but I did not leave his side because the nursing care was great. The hospitalist was atrocious, and I was not going to leave his side. And so then you eat that food at the hospital. So then we kind of got back into not eating plant-based. And when he got out of the hospital, he could not have anything with any more than 2 grams of fiber in any meal, because they thought he may have had gastroparesis, which is really the paralysis of your stomach muscles, which will not empty anything. So then he had to eat toddler food for about 6 weeks when he came home. So, and then he could have meat, but it had to be like chicken and that kind of thing. And so I kind of got back into the habit of eating more of that food in terms of the non-plant-based food. So then I gained about 7 pounds back, but I'm still down almost 40 pounds from where I was in 2018. So now they did rule out gastroparesis. He does have the ability to eat really whatever he wants to now. And so we're getting back on that plant-based diet. He had a scan for the calcium, that's in your arteries, and it had more than doubled in a 6-year period of time. So we saw a plant-based cardiologist about 2 weeks ago, and she said, "You're on the right track." She goes, "I do not want you eating any oil, because with what you've got going on, it could potentially, create some issues for you." And so we will remain plant-based, but she does want him to have some fish and a little bit of dairy, like yogurt, doesn't have all the sugar and all that stuff in it. So we've eliminated sugar, eliminated salt and anything with oil, and I become a label reader. And the thing that to me is so appalling is, in the things that I would like to have, and from a convenience standpoint, like I said, I like to have just a tortilla chip. Do you think you can find a tortilla chip that doesn't have the crappy oil in it? It's all the seed oils and all the bad oils. And then as far as I'm aware of, there's a minimum of 38 types of sugars that are hidden sugars, or the crummy sugars. And so I cook everything from scratch. And, I do my own salad dressings, and I make a kind of a plant-based cheese substitute. It doesn't necessarily taste like the queso that I would make, but it's a darn close second. And for my health and for the health of Dave, she said to him, "You have a 20% chance of dying from a stroke or a heart attack." And she said, "That doesn't even have to do with your calcium. It has to do with your age." So knowing that, and she did some additional testing for some of his cholesterol scores. He is in good shape. And she said, "Just keep doing what you're doing, because, you're going to have a better chance of longevity and eliminating a heart attack and a stroke." So we are going to continue on in that mode. And so that really has been kind of the genesis of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And, growing up on a farm, I never would have thought that I would become plant-based, because number one, we didn't have any plants in the house.
Tell us a little bit about how you transitioned to that. Well, first thing I want to say is, isn't it crazy that you go to the hospital to get, quote, well, and the food they serve, not only the patients, but in the cafeteria, and you watch the doctors. I've gone through a lot of that in the last few years with my own parents, my mom in and out of hospitals, and going there and eating and watching the staff and seeing what they bring into her room. Always has to have Jello or pudding. And I mean, just this crazy stuff. And it's like, please tell me how that even sort of makes sense.
Right.
You've just had surgery. You've taken your body through all the rigmarole of antibiotics and anesthetics, and I mean, just everything that you do. And if there's ever a time that you need to put whole healing food into your body, that's it. But it's kind of like what you said with your doctor all along those years. Nobody ever said, "Hey, they mentioned your stress," because you can write a script for that, but no conversation about diet and all that stuff. And it's funny. I don't remember, it was earlier in the year, I went and had my blood work done, had my labs run, which I do every year. And it was so funny because when the gal called back, she said, "Everything looks good. Your cholesterol is on the slight slightly higher side. It's not high, but it's on the slightly higher side. And she said, so just cut back on fats. Well, first of all, if you've done any research, you know now that that is such an outdated myth that dietary fat causes cholesterol, high cholesterol in your body. It is not true. It's been disproven. But the other really funny thing is, and I even said, what exactly do you want me to cut out of my diet? Because never once had anybody asked me, what is your diet? What do you eat? So to just have that as the point blank response, it's like you talk about reading from a script. And I
Mhm.
always laugh so hard when I see anything, whether it's supplements, which I kind of get that for medications. But even then, most of the time, a doctor doesn't know what contraindicates with a medication. I learned that from my mom. Thank God for the pharmacist, because the pharmacist was the one who would look at stuff and go, oh, I don't think, this is not going to mix well or whatever. But it's just so funny. And I know that that's just kind of a CYA technique that so many people do. Consult your doctor before you start an exercise program. Consult your doctor before you change your diet. And they don't have a clue. But
Right,
as
right.
long as people say that, they feel like they're covered.
Yep.
So that's interesting about the hospital food. So talk to us a little bit about how, because the hardest thing, of course, most of it's the mental work that you have to do. We get into habits, we're conditioned, we've been eating this way forever. It's knee jerk to open up the fridge and reach for this and all of that. So changing anything can be a challenge. So talk to us a little bit about you made the decision and you started shifting things in your diet. What process did you take yourself through?
To start out, I started just watching some videos, even on YouTube, of plant-based people. What are they eating? What are you doing? And so to start out, I kind of transitioned to eating a lot of legumes, um, not even necessarily a lot of salads. Potatoes have been really, I think, given a bad rap to a large
I
degree.
agree.
And because I did try the keto diet years ago. Well, I ended up having heart palpitations, so I quickly nixed that within about 2 months. But I, started adding in just more, sweet potatoes and, things with even like if you do a baked potato, you bake it and then you refrigerate it and then you like do air fryer the next day, it changes how the starch works in your body. And I'm also, borderline pre-diabetic. And so, nobody has said anything about doing anything about that, other than, watch what you're eating. Cut out all this stuff that really seems to be a myth as far as what you really need to cut out. But so I just started adding in, changing things in terms of yogurt. I will do some soy yogurt that I make my own from scratch. And I pretty much I just did all kinds of research, started trying recipes that I liked, and just really started adding things in. The big thing that I have found is the calorie density of foods. And what's interesting with Dave, he needs things that are more caloric dense than what I do. So I just took a class on making salads and preparing them for a full week so that they won't go bad. And I'm actually going to start implementing it this week. I just bought the course last weekend. So I went through that. But if you look at calorie density, you've got things like non-starchy vegetables have 100 calories per pound. Then if you go to fruit, it's about 300 calories, 400 calories for, say, potatoes, sweet potatoes, rice, pasta. Legumes have about 500. And then when you get into avocados, they're about 750 calories per pound. Well, obviously, I'm not eating a pound, but I always found with avocados, if I religiously ate them, my HDL was much higher. And I mean, there's so many things with, cholesterol that, you don't know what to believe. But, when you've got some heart issues going on, you don't want to stroke out either. So I've cut back a little bit on avocados, but I love them. And so I just started watching that. And then, of course, if you look at oils, it's 4,000 calories per pound from a calorie density standpoint. And so what I have started to do is to, at the beginning of my meals, bulk up on things that are lower density calorically, and then add in my starches and my proteins and things like that. And then in terms of eating oils, we'll do healthy things like flaxseed, chia seeds, avocados, hemp seeds even. And so just kind of adding all of that in, making sure that you're getting a rounded diet. And that's kind of what we've started with. Now, Dave can't, I mean, he can still eat salads now that he does not have gastroparesis, but for him to bulk up on salad, then he wouldn't be hungry. And he doesn't have a huge appetite. So he still eats salads, but he has to kind of eat some of those other things because he's 140 pounds soaking wet with his clothes on at the end of the day. And when he was in the hospital and had those issues, he got down to 128 pounds and he looked very, very frail. And so he's kind of gained back some weight, but he's never been heavy anyway, for the most part, most of our life. But he's within 5 pounds of what he was when we got married. But he needs to kind of bulk up a little bit. So there's that fine balance between the two of us. He's trying to gain weight, and I'm trying to lose weight and get rid of visceral fat.
You know, that brings up a good topic, and that is the bio-individual aspect of all of us. And that's what I always tell people all the time, is that you can't, even genetically, I don't care if it worked for your mom, your sister, your brother, your cousin, whatever, even though we share a lot of the same DNA, your body is different, the way it interprets things, childhood illnesses and antibiotics that you might have gone on at a young age. All of that can really affect your microbiome. A lot of those kind of things, which really does, it may sound crazy to some people, but keep in mind, science is always changing. And so you have to really test for yourself. Don't just read headlines. Don't just read, the latest Ladies' Home Journal. I don't even know if that's still a magazine, but whatever, that talks about the latest, greatest diet and fat and all of that, because most of us know diets don't work. If they did,
Right.
Everybody would be thin in a bikini on the beach and looking
Right.
fabulous. It really is. It's all about lifestyle modification. It's setting yourself up with those foods that you love, that are satiating and that you will be drawn toward. And I always like to say crowding out the good food. So if you start with, or the bad food, if you start with filling your plate with those things that you really love and enjoy that are healthy for you, it leaves less room and less desire ultimately for those other things. And I hear you on the cheese. I never was a huge dairy person in general, but I did love cheese. So other forms of dairy, not so much, but cheese, I definitely did. Cheese and crackers, cheese on this, cheese on that. I love Mexican food, cheese, cheese, cheese. And slowly but surely, I weaned myself off of that. And now I mostly only eat goat cheese or sheep's milk feta cheese. Those seem to work well for me. And that was, again, just kind of testing and trying, and then paying attention to labels, because I would eat feta cheese and feel great. And then I would eat feta cheese and not feel great. And I finally figured out, when it's sheep's milk, organic sheep's milk, it does much better in my body. So again, like paying attention. And you mentioned the seed oils, same thing. I thought I had an aversion to garbanzo beans in hummus, which just broke my heart, because I love hummus. And I just started noticing inflammation in my joints and how they would feel after eating hummus. And then I'm trying to think, what did I do that was different? I can't remember right now how I discovered it, but the Trader Joe's Mediterranean hummus is the one that I always used to get. Oh, I know what it was. I had started, like you, I started shifting out everything, and I love to cook, which I'm going to ask you about, but I love to cook. So for me, that's like therapy. So dinking around with recipes and figuring stuff out is fun for me. And I started making my own hummus. And at one point I thought, okay, so I'm going to substitute white beans for the garbanzo beans and see. And I was making my own. And that did fine. It was great. And then I made hummus one evening for a party that I was having. And I didn't have the white beans. I had garbanzo beans still. I made it with the garbanzo beans and, did whatever. And then, like the next day or whatever, I'm cleaning out the refrigerator, which basically means I'm filling my plate a little bit with all those fun snacks and everything from the party. And I went ahead and ate some, knowing I'm probably going to pay the price for this later, but I'm going to eat it now. And I did, and everything was fine. And what I discovered was it was the canola oil, the seed oil. I don't
Sure.
do well with canola oil because I kept thinking, so I ate that and then I ate it again later. And same thing, like my body didn't react at all. And I thought that is really weird. Here I thought it was garbanzo beans. And so I switched to white beans, whatever. And making it at home, I was making it with either, extra virgin olive oil or avocado oil. And so then I went to Trader Joe's and I just read the label. It's like you talked about reading labels. I read the label and I saw canola oil. And at that point, I was starting to cut out seed oils, becoming really aware of seed oils and cutting that out. And I thought, maybe that's it. And I tested it. Again, it's like I can feel uncomfortable for a day to determine and that's literally what it was. So now I
Wow.
avoid, but it was so great to find out, okay, I'm not allergic to even though I was making it with the white beans, the garbanzo beans are just get better. What can I say? Anyway, so it's interesting how, you've got a body hack, you've got to test, you've got to try, and you just got to figure all that stuff out for yourself, for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So do you enjoy cooking? That's what I
You
wanted to ask.
know, we, I have over the years, and Dave and I have always kind of cooked together. And so he, prior to retiring, probably did 60% of the cooking. And then the other 40, we would either do together or I would make a dish on my own, things that maybe he wasn't very familiar with. Like when we have lasagna, I just do it. Um, and then he retired 4 years ago. And so was doing probably about 90% of the cooking because we had our standard things, when we were eating meat that he could make, he knew what to do and he loves to cook. And then when we became plant-based a year and a half ago, he's like, I don't even know what to do. He's like, I don't know where to even begin. Give him a recipe. And I mean, he should be able to follow a recipe because he's been following recipes for years, but it was a mental block. I think part of it was resistance. And so he loves to chop vegetables up, which is wonderful. So I can say, hey, let's make this for dinner tomorrow night or whatever. Can you have this amount of vegetables chopped up, have it ready, and then I'll come in and cook. So now I'm experimenting more and I'm starting to enjoy cooking again, whereas before, to me, it was like if he could just do it and have it done, because we are big leftover eaters, we'll have stuff in the fridge and I put stuff in the freezer. And because I don't like to cook from scratch for every meal. I just don't want to do that. So, and part of it goes back to my childhood, not having food. I want it so I can go to the fridge, pull it out, and I don't have to work for it, except for once, have it done and have the leftovers. So I'm getting better at that. And now I'm going to start taking some of my recipes that we have liked over the years and see how I can make them more plant-based. And I did quit alcohol altogether on June 30th. And so now I don't have that crutch. So now I'm starting to come up with some mocktails of my own that I can have. So I'm kind of trying to create some recipes that I like and, just other things that we like that work for us. And so I'm experimenting and I've got about 10 recipes of things that I've kind of created or I've taken this recipe, that recipe, and this recipe, and none of them work for me. But hey, I like aspects of this, putting them together and coming up with. I found a ranch dressing that is close to the real McCoy without being full of all the junk. And I made it the other day, and I'm like, I think so I'm gonna do like an ebook eventually, and then I'd like to do a cookbook, before I, reach 80.
I love that. I mean, it's fun and it's amazing how when you start playing around with it, you realize that it's not that difficult to hack recipes at all.
Right, right.
What do you think was the biggest challenge? What would you say so far has been the biggest challenge in this whole process?
I think just the mindset of saying, okay, I'm going to have to give up certain things to be healthy, um, and just making the decision to do that and following through with it. Eating out is probably the next most difficult thing because to try to go someplace, when you go out to eat, even if you are going to eat oil, they're not using the good oils. They're using the crummy oils that I don't want in my body. And so that seems to be the most difficult. I mean, even if you went to and had a plant-based meal, for instance, Chipotle makes a plant-based meal. It's all full of sodium. You've got the sugars, you've got this. So we try to eat out once a week. My love language is tacos. And so that ends up being part of my 10% of non-plant-based. And then we have a great restaurant that we go to that they make a decent taco. It's not real greasy. And then I've started making some, fish tacos. I use mahi mahi for fish tacos at home. And just trying to, do some of those things. And with all of the things that I've eliminated, alcohol included, it's not getting caught in that trap of, oh, well, I could have one glass of wine and be fine. I just decided, nope. And we go in the summertime. We have a winery that we have always gone to that has music every Sunday afternoon. And so in July and August and September, when we went, I just, and there you can bring in non-alcoholic beverages. So I brought in my own, sparkling water or whatever, and Dave would enjoy his glass of wine and do that, and we'd enjoy the music. And so it's just not getting caught up in those traps. I think that is the biggest thing for us, both of us, because one of us can be coerced into going to eat out and not having that so healthy meal. And so it's just trying to stay on track and, have that mental fortitude to stick to the plan.
Yeah, I know for me, I always say on this channel, especially and all through life, I'm an 80-20 girl, right? 80% of the time, absolutely stick to the plan, 20% give yourself grace. Although really and truly, I'm like you, I'm more of a 90-10, but 80-20, one is easy to remember for people. And I feel like for most people, that is still so far superior to what most people are doing anyway. And the one thing that I try to do, if I know I'm going to go out to eat and I know it's not going to be what I would feed myself at home, I make sure if it's dinner, I make sure all that day I eat optimal food, and I make sure the next morning I get up and, do that too. So it's like, the human body was meant to tolerate a lot, and it can, but the better that we can set it up to be successful in those
Right.
ways, I think you can almost, not always, because again, depending on what foods upset your body or your digestive system, and not everybody experiences that, but a lot of people, once they get their body really optimal with good nutrition and they get rid of a lot of that inflammation and the chronic buildup that they have, that a lot of times they don't even realize. I always, work with people and all of a sudden they're like, man, I feel so great. And it's like, yeah. And you didn't think that you felt bad before. You just didn't
Right.
realize that you could feel so much better with, those kind of things. So it is interesting how, just setting yourself up that way for success. And then you can have that cheat meal and just breeze through.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. What do you feel has made the biggest impact for your health? And it doesn't have to be just one thing. Maybe it's three things, but what would you say if you were going to line up what's made the biggest impact?
I think the adding in exercise, the meals, just changing the way we're eating. And for me, the alcohol, eliminating that because, you get done with a stressful day of work. I have a glass of wine, which leads to two glasses of wine. On the weekend, it might lead to a third one. And then I am mentally wiped out. I'm tired and I accomplish nothing. Fall asleep in the car on the way home from the winery, come home and just, then I'm like, what are we going to eat? Because I'm not going to cook. And then we would go out to eat, which would maybe be a burger, which was not in the plan. So for me, I think probably giving up the alcohol. And, the thing that I have found with all the changes that I have made is my triglycerides have just totally decreased. My cholesterol is good. I'm still on a statin, and I'll probably stay on a statin just due to my family history. I mean, unless if something changes drastically. But and my fasting glucose is getting better. And I'm wondering if the wine, because I didn't really track it when I was drinking wine, but my glucose, because I have a continuous glucose monitor, my insurance won't pay for it. So I pay for it out of pocket. And so about 7-8 months ago when I started, when it would go up really high and it would stay up for a long time. With these changes, I'm finding it doesn't go up as high. And because I just started wearing it again 2 weeks ago, because the one I was using, they ran out of it. It's out of stock. So I had to switch to a different one, but it comes down faster. And like when I am done at night and go to bed, it's not where I would like it to be. I mean, it's just right on the edge, but it's dipping down further. But it's staying more consistent throughout the night. Whereas before, sometimes it would spike or sometimes it would go real low. And so, and I'm not on any insulin or anything. I'm, again, it's pre-diabetic, but I became aware of it and I'm like, I don't want diabetes, along with all this other stuff. I don't want diabetes. And so I really think that the diet and just giving up alcohol probably are the two biggest things. And then exercise. What I find too, when I exercise, as I can see on my continuous glucose monitor, like when I eat, I try to exercise after I've eaten or right before, and it will start to bring it down immediately. And so I try, when I don't have a ton of stuff going on and leave the house, I try to exercise a little bit 3 times a day. Not that it's, I'm not spending 4 hours doing this. I may be spending 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there, 20 minutes here. And sometimes it ends up being longer because I just enjoy getting out and walking or riding the bike.
That's great. And I always say, you can't hack what you don't track. So it's great that you're doing some of that tracking. And, even that, because I'll have clients who'll say, oh my gosh, don't make me keep a food diary. And I always say, you know what? Do it for 3 days. I'm not going to ask you to do that forever. Just do it for 3 days. And even that, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have, I had 5 olives or I had 20 chips or whatever, just a basic idea so that you can begin to look back and see. And then the other thing I do is have people weigh in 20 minutes after you eat. How do you feel? How do you feel? Like stop for a minute, pause and just think, how am I feeling? Is my brain foggy? Is my stomach rumbling? Am I feeling anything? Am I feeling slightly dizzy or off or whatever? And then weigh in, not on the scale, but check in with yourself in an hour. Right. How do you feel the next day? Just different things like that. And if you're tracking what you eat, again, just the basics, not you don't have to weigh it. You don't have to measure everything, but just have a basic idea of what did I eat? How did I feel? How do I feel the next day? And what can I shift up just a little bit and see where things go? Yeah, the alcohol piece is challenging. And I think you participated in my Throttle Back the Bottle program.
I read your emails and I didn't officially participate in it. And what was interesting is I, started getting your emails and I didn't necessarily read all of them because it really wasn't on my radar, but every once in a while I would see, an email would come through because I get tons of emails. I get an email that would come through and I'm like, that's very interesting. And so then I started to think about that. And then I came back to a thought that I had. I don't know if you've ever seen Elizabeth Vargas, who was on the news. And she started out as a very social drinker. And we didn't drink a lot of wine until we moved back to Wisconsin 13 years ago, because I'm not into spending a lot of money on wine, and the cheap wines were just vile. But when we came back to Wisconsin, we've got a lot of wineries, and they have, the prices are not exorbitant, and we belong to some wine clubs, and so then you get a discount. And so I I remembered that segment and how she started out as a social drinker, and pretty soon she was going down a road that was not good at all. And I have a sister that had years of drinking problems, heavy drinker. And I'm like, I don't want to go down that road. And so I just decided, and I could go out and have a beer because I don't like beer. Does not put me over the edge because I'll maybe have one.
Right. That's
With
me.
But
Otherwise, I have to go to the bathroom all day.
I just don't like the taste of it. It gives me a headache. Most
Yeah.
beers give me a headache. And so wine became my preferred choice. And, on a Friday night, Dave and I'd go sit out under the apple tree and, we'd each have two glasses, which for me, I usually would stop at that point. But, if I had a long day, if I added in that third one, if I had a tough day at work on a Friday night and I didn't have to work the next day, it might get into that third one. And I'm like, this is not what I want to be doing. So I just decided, hey, I assessed that situation. I assessed what you were talking about. And then I decided, I think I'm going to do this. So it will be 6 months here pretty soon since I gave it up. And we did go someplace. I had a near beer because I just wanted to try it. And she brought the container out and I looked at that and I'm like, that's not a near beer. That's got alcohol in it. And I had taken one sip. And I showed it to Dave. I said, isn't there alcohol in there? Am I stupid? What's wrong? And he goes, there's beer in that. So she came back. I said, I think you grabbed the wrong one. It's got alcohol in it. She goes, oh. So I did have one sip, but it didn't put me over the edge. So,
Well, that's good. And it sounds like you weren't like a problem. You just realized it wasn't serving you well.
right.
And that was me too. Like, when I started telling friends and different people, they were like, why? Like, it's not like you had a problem. It's like, no, but I was getting into that daily mindless. It's 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. I'm starting dinner, open the bottle of wine, same thing. I almost never stopped at one. I could stop at two, but it was weird. Like I had the hardest time stopping at one. And then same thing, like if it kept going, pretty soon the third, whatever. And the older I got, the more I realized it was affecting me in the next morning. I didn't have a hangover, but I just didn't have the motivation that I typically have. Just lethargic. And it would be like, maybe I won't go walk. And, I don't feel like doing, just kept putting stuff off. And mine kind of came, well, it was funny. I signed up to do dry January of 2020.
Okay.
That was my first go with that. And I failed, but I didn't really fail. I always tell people it wasn't a failure. I didn't make it. I think I drank 4 times during that time. So it's like, well, 27 days I was a success. So I decided to make that a success and not a failure. So even though it was in the middle of the month, and there's a whole story behind why, which really doesn't matter because that's still using it as a coping mechanism. And that's just dumb because it didn't change anything. But I decided, you know what? That's not a failure. What did I learn from that? I learned when I use it as a default and then I don't want to continue to do that. And so I picked back up, I got myself back on the horse. And then the pandemic hit and we were home. And then pretty soon, it went from 5 o'clock to 4 o'clock to 3 o'clock to 2 o'clock to, oh, let's have mimosas with breakfast. We don't have to go anywhere. We're not trying, and pretty soon it was just like, stop, this is enough. And so then I did a month and a half over the summer and then picked up again with Dryuary that January. And then, I think it was August of 22. Debbie Wood, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I was at her house in Cleveland and it was just weird. I woke up the next morning and I thought, I'm done. I'm taking a break. And I did. And so I'm not a never ever, but I've completely changed everything. Now it's occasional, it's intentional, and I don't miss it. I don't think about it. or any of that. And it really did. It changed everything in terms of alertness, inflammation, a lot of that kind of stuff. So for anybody listening, if you want to try it, just go to throttlebackthebottle.com, sign up. There's a free email series, and it'll just give you some of the steps. And more than anything, it's just to give you things to think about. And even if what I always say is you can substitute anything for alcohol. It could be sugar, could be chips. I mean, chips and salsa are one of my biggest weaknesses, which I've kicked that habit too. But yeah, so it's just funny how we use food
Mhm.
and different things in that way. So
Did you
yeah.
find your sleep improved?
Oh, are you kidding? Yes, absolutely. I never have a problem falling asleep, period. But what I was finding is I would wake up after 4 hours and I would lay there for 2 to 3 hours,
Hmm.
just unable to shut things off. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. My
Sure.
sleep has improved with that. I'm still working on sleep. And I think a lot of it has to do with work, with working full time still and just stupid stuff that comes into your brain. And when you wake up in the middle of the night and then you just start thinking about work.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It's shutting off the brain. And even that becomes a habit. It's just becomes a habit and I think that's hard to break. I will be the first to acknowledge that. I certainly don't have that perfected, but I've just learned when you're a little kid, you don't do that. You know what I mean? Because
Mm,
you're not thinking about your mortgage or your job or what has to be done or, all the different things like that. And so I think that's a lot of it is just learning to break that habit. Yeah.
right. And when I
So
do wake up now, I've been doing meditation. I think I'm on like 2100 and some days in a row. So
I
I'll just
know
do
I
that.
just passed or I'm about to pass 600.
Okay.
When you had shared that, I was like, wow, this is on the Insight Timer app for anybody listening. But yeah, it's great. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. And it's for me, I have certain ones that I listen to before I go to work that because when you're dealing with people who have had a fire with their home and they're calling in and it's been 6 months, they're still out of their home and they had to bring structural engineers in and everything, and things are not going as quickly as they want them to. And now you're on this receiving end of anger and frustration that some days I need to be proactive and I can tell on the days that I don't do these two meditations that my response to those kinds of calls and other calls as well is very different. And so I refuse there's one of them that's shorter. And I start with that one and then I may move to the other one, which is one's like 5 minutes long, the other's 10 minutes long. And you wouldn't think that it would make a difference in the world. And it's like, wow. And so and I'll do a meditation on the weekends, but I don't necessarily do those two on weekends because Dave's pretty easy to get along with. I don't feel like I need to uh, use those on those days. So I use a different one, but it makes a big difference for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm big fan, big fan. If you were to give someone just getting started that's listening to your journey and thinking, man, I have some cleaning up to do, what would be 3 tips that you would offer someone just to get
Um,
started?
to get started, first of all, I would say make a decision. I mean, you end up having to make a decision. First of all, you have to figure out what you don't want and what you do want. And then once you are clear with what it is that you do want, you need to make a decision. And I have not always been on board with people that have said, well, you just need to make a decision. Well, yeah, you really do need to make a decision because if you don't decide to do something, you're not going to move forward. And if you don't know where you're going, you're not going to, make that decision either. And then just a second here, I've got some things in my notes because you did mention, and then keep your goals and intentions in front of you, and then give yourself grace. That's probably a fourth one.
I think the grace one is the one to start with almost. It's kind of like what I said when I did my first dry January challenge and I fell off the wagon, so to speak, on like the 12th day or something. And then I just decided I can either choose to see this as a failure and just give up and go back to my old habits. What is that going to serve? But instead, I decided, okay, how can I learn from this? And I think it's so important with the rest of that, whether it's, the food that you eat, your movement and
Right.
exercise. It's like I mentioned with the 10,000 steps a day. I could be super rigid, but the reality of it is there's going to be those days when you get derailed, when you're sick or whatever. So if I focus on an end goal of, at the end of the year, I want to have an average of 10,000 steps. I want to do an 80-20 thing, or, as you mentioned, 90-10. Okay, I'm going to shoot for this goal, but 10% of the time, I'm going to go out, I'm going to have tacos, I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm not going to stress over it, which adds more.
Right.
So I think the grace and compassion part is big. So I always coach everybody, have a plan for success, but also have a plan for those derailing times so that you know how you're going to recover and not beat yourself up and not just decide to cash it in because, you didn't hit 100% every single day.
Sure. I'm terrible when it comes to when I leave the house. My Apple Watch has to be charged because I always tell Dave I'm not walking for free because I want the credit for the steps and the other thing through work. I'm cheap. We get if you get certain number of points, and a lot of that is coming from walking or exercising and meditation and things like that. We get $90 a quarter, which I have used for mental health, my fire pit that I have out on the patio, things like that. I use that money for that. And I tell them, hey, this thing has to be charged before we can leave the house because I'm not walking for free. So,
I love it. We had a financial planner once who called I think I said the same thing, like I'm cheap. And he was like, no, you are value oriented. And I thought, oh, I like that. That sounds so much more smart and, and on top of things. So I think that's it. And, little rewards are huge. I was just, at my school board meeting and we were talking about teacher pay, unfortunately, which is always way too low, but that's a whole other topic. And um, somebody mentioned how financial reward is an incentive that a lot of people will work toward. Most people will, right? If you have the opportunity to earn a bonus or whatever. And I think it's important to look at that in anything that you do. Is what's that reward going to be? What is that little reward going to be that's going to, dangle that carrot out in front of you to shoot towards? So
sure.
why not?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, but now they're going to change that program. So actually, it's going to be better. So they're going to give us money up front that we can use. And they're still going to have a little bit of that program, but so if you want to go get a massage or you want to do something
Nice.
like that, so that will be changing. But that's one of the things I don't do enough of, and I think that self-care is certainly worth it. So I need to get on board with this new program this January that they're going to be implementing. So that'll be nice, but
Perfect.
fun.
Well, Helen, thanks for taking the time to share your journey with us. I know it's going to be helpful for a lot of people. It's been helpful for me. I love that you've done habit stacking. That's one of the things I like to focus on, where you start with one thing and then you kind of figure different things out and think, well, now maybe I'll shift this and then I'll shift that and then I'll shift one thing. When we try to take on too much all at once, a confused mind says no. So it's so important to think, I'm just going to start with this, whether it's movement or whether it's eliminating seed oils. It's kind of funny. I've really started focusing more on seed oils instead of saying cut out sugar, cut out ultra processed foods. I just say avoid seed oils, because if you avoid seed oils, you avoid
A
almost
lot.
all the rest of that. So it makes it and you're not focused on that. You mentioned not wanting to feel deprived at some point. You had mentioned that, and it's like, well, if you don't focus on the fact that you're taking out sugar, because a lot of people, that's like their big trigger. If it's like, just read the labels and find those things
Mhm.
that don't have seed oils, it makes it more challenging. But if you can give somebody a list of some ideas that they might try, that
Sure.
don't have it, then you're good to go for success.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, I don't crave sugar. I'm a salt addict.
You and me both. You and me both. I don't have a sweet tooth, thank goodness. I
Yep.
love a little tiny piece of dark chocolate here and there, but that's enough for me.
Yep.
Any final thoughts?
No, I think I've pretty much given you what I know and what's worked for me, and just need to keep plugging away. And I hope that your viewers find this helpful.
I'm sure they will. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Health Warrior, thanks for joining me on the journey. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you're interested in Dry January, which is coming up as of this recording, or just taking back control over alcohol in your life, go to throttlebackthebottle.com. It's a free email series that'll just walk you through some steps to cut back, quit altogether, make some intentional decisions, and decide for yourself what you want to do. Grab my guide over at lowertoxiclife.com, and I'm going to share my next video on how to build a capsule menu, which will incorporate some of the things that Helen and I talked about in terms of making eating simplified.